We do feel like working with organizations that we can together provide leadership to the field about what quality of life for people with disabilities and mental illness and older adults looks like. We are international. We work in Canada, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, as well as the U.S. And our core sort of capacity over really the lifespan of CQL, the last over 40 years, has been around looking at the definition and how to use the information that you get from that measurement for improvement of quality of life for people receiving services and support. I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking specifically. I'm sorry.
Excuse me. Excuse me, if you could mute your phone. Excuse me, please mute the phones. We're right in the middle of a conference.
Sorry. Yeah, we can hear. If your phone is not on mute, we can hear everything that you're saying. and actually, to hear the joke, it was really touching.
Why?
Because they can hear us.
Eric, I'm sorry. I can't. Right now. I'm hearing sound in the background. Do you hear that long ringing sound? Okay. Oh, that makes it.
If we could,
Okay. I'm going to try this again and try and get started again. And I apologize for sort of all the noise. I'm not sure whether it's my phone or the technology or what, but let's proceed if we can. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the personal outcome measures, a little bit more on that than some of the other things. And many of you have heard this, and I apologize if it's old news, but I think we've got a mixed group, and I want to make sure that we have, you know, that we do cover it. And this is the tool that OPWDD has indicated that they will be using, or that they will ask the DISCOs to use. So I do think it's worth spending time on it. As a point of reference, a little bit of the history about how we came to develop the personal outcome measures. We've been, as I mentioned earlier, we've been around for 40+ years. We've always had quality measures that we worked with, but we really focused on a lot of the traditional assumptions about approaches to quality that really, and honestly, I think but we certainly in many quality assurance we still see a lot of these kinds of things. That there's a focus on uniformity, that everything is done the same way and consistently over time. That we have experts in specific subject areas or topics, that there is a hierarchy of authority that is followed each and every time, and that really is about compliance with the process. And we certainly came out of that position, did that for a number of years. But the problem with that was we came back from a number of...
Without the slides to know what she's talking about, so...
Excuse me, if you are on the conference, if you would please mute your phones.
Okay.
Please mute your phones. Thank you.
So the issue was that our review teams were coming back from doing reviews and really measuring all of this compliance process and finding organizations that, got everything right that was in our process manual. But the problem with that was that the people that they met that were receiving services were still living really terrible lives. And so we put everything on the shelf and went back to the drawing board and said, we want to start with this. We want to start with the people. We want to know what is their quality of life, what choices and options do they have available to them in the service system, and then back into those practices, those processes, and figure out what were the things that actually did contribute to a personal and individualized quality of life. Through that process, we met with people receiving services. We met with family members, professionals. We did a number of focus groups and qualitative data analysis and really came up with, in the early 90s, a list of 30, what we called at that time, performance-based outcome measures. That changed within just a few years to the personal outcome measures. We also did quite a bit of data analysis, and that list of 30 eventually, in 2005, became the 21 personal outcome measures that we use today. We've been able to eliminate some along the way, consolidate some along the way, eliminate them if they weren't really predictors of anything else, combine them if they were so predictive of one another they were actually measuring the same thing. We have built around the personal outcome measures a process to ongoing test the validity of the measures, that they still do actually measure what people classify as quality of life, but also the reliability of the decision points that are made around it. So I'll talk a little bit more about how we gather the information in just a second, but I just want to say 21 indicators, and you'll see a list of them a little bit later, are really things that we believe are fairly universal to all of us, things that are really, really important, that most people would agree are contributors to quality of life, but that each of those things are important to varying degrees to each of. We have different priorities around the outcomes in our lives. Just to summarize, we looked at how we were going to measure quality and said we really want to shift from this process focus, which looks at program standards and professional criteria, where we put people in slots. We have an opening, we have a bed, we have, those kinds of things, and we just assign somebody to those. And we make our own expectations for what quality is or how to measure performance of individuals in the program. We wanted to shift from that. We wanted to design a process to help the field shift from that type of quality system to one that was really focused on the person, that people help define what the services should look like, that we design things around people, and that they actually do the evaluation and set the expectations for service improvement and performance. I do think that outcomes is a word we hear a lot, and that it's worth our time to spend just a moment here to talk about different kinds of outcomes and when we say personal outcome measures, what we really mean. There are certainly clinical outcomes, and I know those of us that are involved with a lot of healthcare services or other kinds of clinical supports, we can fairly quickly talk about what clinical outcomes, cure and symptom reduction. And then there are functional outcomes that are really about increasing people's capacity and abilities. But when we talk about personal outcomes, we're talking about what matters important to them. These things are not mutually exclusive by any means. They certainly fit together. And an example, quick example of that is one who has broken a wrist, for instance. The clinical outcome, obviously, is setting the bone. The functional outcome is regaining range of motion and flexibility and agility. The personal outcome, however, might be for this person, if they're a pianist, to be able to play the piano again. So when we think about, I think about clinical and functional outcomes often as the tools that people need to achieve the things that are really important to them personally. So I'm going to talk very quickly about what these outcomes are and how they're organized. They are organized based on years of data analysis in terms of the groupings of outcomes that tend to predict one another. The titles of, for instance, myself for this next group of outcomes are titles that we give, but you'll see why, I think, as we talk through it. So the first group of outcomes has 9 indicators underneath that. And these are things that are really very personal. They're about our physical environment. They're the foundational sorts of elements in our lives. So there are things like being connected to family and having somebody that you really rely on, an intimate relationship in your life, being safe and healthy, free from abuse and neglect, being able to share, have control over what kind of information is shared about you, and really exercising your rights and having a sense of being treated fairly. These are very foundational outcomes, and in fact, we'll talk a little bit later about our basic assurances. These correspond very directly to some systems quality measures we have around basic assurances. The next set of outcomes we've titled My World, and these are 7 outcomes that really group together around the broader community and how people are connected and the opportunities that they have to do things out in the world. So it's the things about, having options about where you live and who you live with, about choosing what you do during the day, work, that kind of thing, about having access to your environment, including transportation, being, having time, spending time with people other than other people that receive supports and paid staff, having an opportunity to give back and play meaningful social goals, and having options about services, not just the services that we provide, for instance, but other services in the community that all of us use, where you go, who you use as your bank, who your physician is, and those kinds of things. So, and that's talking about really meaningful choice. And the final set of outcomes is a grouping of 5, and we call these my dreams. These are really things about personal goals, choice, self-determination, the things that really help us kind of be more fully ourselves. And they're about the people that we surround ourselves with, that sort of our personal champions, our friends, the goals that we set for ourselves and the things that we achieve, and what gives us a strong sense of being sort of respected for who we are. So that's just a quick summary of the 21 outcomes and the kinds of indicators that fall underneath that. There's obviously a lot more that we could say about it, but I'll stop with that right now. We only have an hour and a half. But what I do want to say is that in terms of how we use the tool, the main point is to learn as much as we can about how all of those things are defined when we have through a process of conversation with people, a sort of a discovery. We call it an outcomes interview or an outcomes conversation, and then from that glean what are the things that are most important, because the goal isn't for all 21 outcomes to be present for everyone all the time, but it's to really understand, where they are really focused their time and attention at that point in time, and how we can best support them to achieve things that's important to them. It's a frame for learning about people through a conversation. And we look at 2 things when we have these conversations. We're talking about, we ask the person how they define it and is it present or not for them. And then we don't impose our definition or any other standardized definition for that outcome upon them. So we're not, going to dictate how many friends somebody should have, or what actually constitutes a family. If somebody tells us that somebody is like family to them, but there's no blood relation, we would still consider them part of the natural support network. So each person is a unique sample of one, but and then the other thing that we're looking at is that how have services and support sort of been designed around the individual based on that unique definition of the outcome.
If I could just interrupt, there's still a few people who have left their phones off of mute, and we can hear a lot of background noise. Please, I'm urging everyone on the line to put your phones on mute for the courtesy speaker. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, of course, the timing is such that this was the first opportunity I thought we might take to talk a little bit about the outcome conversation process and maybe call in a few people that I know are using the outcome measures to describe sort of their experience with it. So I know, for instance, we've got folks from the Arc of Students on the line. I don't know if anybody there is actually somebody who has done outcomes interviews or been through the training. I think we have some folks from Westchester and Suffolk, and I think I even got Sadie Stata from Adirondack. So if there's anybody that on the line that is, and there's others I'm sure, that wanted to speak to their experience with the outcome conversation, with that information gathering piece to their peers, this would be a good time to do that. Anybody?
Hi, Beth. This is Jackie Phillips from Arc of Rockland.
Great. Hi, Jackie.
We are full steam ahead with personal outcome measures, interviews, and conversations. What the interviewers are having the hardest time with is gathering information from people who do not use words to communicate. What can you speak to about that?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. And, you know, other people that are using it that may have some advice for Jackie, that would be great as well. And I'm sure, Jackie, you know, you've had this conversation yourself. It is a challenge sometimes when you're not just sitting down like you're talking to your next door neighbor or your best friend. But we proceed from the assumption that everybody communicates, and what we're about in the discovery process is trying to figure out how they communicate. It's on the onus is on us to understand their style of communication. Now, that being said, so we look for all kinds of clues in the environment. We look for how they interact or don't interact with other people. We look for, you know, gifts that are sent to them but from their loved ones to, you know, assess what their interests might be. And we look to the people that know them best to try to help us understand how it is they know them and what their sense is about people's personal definitions. So, you know, if we're talking, sometimes it's a direct support staff, sometimes it's a family member, but we'll have somebody there. We never do this without having met with the person and spent some significant amount of time with them. And I say significant, you know, we don't just go in and say, introduce ourselves. We hang out for a bit. But then the person that may be serving as a proxy of sorts, we will ask them the questions, but we'll try to get them to tell us from the person's perspective. So we might say, you know, what do you think is important to Joe, or how do you think Joe would define friendship, as an example. And, you know, once they've given us their answer, we will sort of ask the follow-up question, how do you know? What is it about what Joe says or does, or how he responds or interacts or doesn't interact, that leads you to believe that? So that we're simultaneously getting the person's opinion, but also asking them to help us understand how they arrived at that opinion, because that's essentially how the person's communicating. In the end, there are times when we are, I would say, respectfully guessing. But you know, the time that that's better than, you know, making decisions on our own without having spent time to try and learn about the person. And it's and I say guessing, but it's never not based on some evidence. It's never just sort of drawn out of thin air. We do look for some real evidence, and you know, we have seen some really phenomenal results through this process for people. But you know, I'll turn it over maybe to some other people that are using the tool and might be able to speak to their experience. Anyone else? Sadie, you're on the line, and you guys have probably been using the outcomes longer than anyone, not probably, you have been using them longer than anyone in New York. Would you have anything to say to that, Sadie, about how to gather information from people who don't?
Yeah, yeah, Beth, you know, we've been accredited for, what, 13 years now, 12 years now. We do, you know, a lot of times the initial interview that we do with people doesn't glean a lot of information, and we use that as a baseline, particularly with folks that, you know, don't use language. But, you know, we can tell a lot from facial expressions, from body language, and then, you know, a lot of it does come from the support staff over time, not generally during the initial interview when the support staff, you know, if somebody first comes into our program and we don't know them very well, that first interview probably doesn't give us a lot of information. But when we go back a year later to interview that person again, regardless of whether they have, you know, language or not, the information that we gather from the support staff really, you know, shoots up in terms of volume and usability, in terms of how they have perceived that person's responses to some of the things that they've been exposed to over that year.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It is a process with anyone, whether they use language or not, spoken language or not. It is a process that we get to know them over time by really paying attention and spending time with them. That's a really good point, Sadie.
Yeah, you know, and the exposure to, you know, the information that you're trying to glean from the interview is helpful to staff in terms of trying to figure out what they can expose the person to that might give them some reaction as to whether the person likes it or doesn't like it or is interested in more or totally not interested in it at all, that gives you, you know, information for the future and helps you design, you know, your supports.
So anybody else have other thoughts either related to that specific topic or just their use of personal outcome measures as a discovery tool in their organization? Jackie, did that help at all?
Yeah, thank you. It, you know, it was interesting that you said to use that first interview as a baseline and then come back a year later after you put supports in place and see if the person was happy with those experiences and that exposure that was given to them. Thank you.
Beth, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Sandra Moody in New York City. How are you doing?
Great, Sandra. How are you?
Hi, I just was going to chip in a little bit on how personal outcomes are going here in the city.
Great.
Okay. Well, we've been working I'm sorry, for about a year now, and we're going, like as Jackie said, full ahead. But and I think I'm obviously biased overseeing the whole thing, but I think that they're going down very well, and the reaction that we get from people who go to the 4-day training and start interviewing is along the lines of, like, why did we wait to now to do this? This is the way that we should have been getting to know the individuals all along. It's really just a way of quite effectively giving you the opportunity to peel more layers off an onion, so to speak, of getting to know someone on a better level so that we can provide more appropriate support to them than we have ever experienced to date. So when people are exposed to it, that's the reaction we get. I think one of my biggest challenges is the fact that we're a rather large agency, and I can't, my dream is to get everybody at the agency trained, and doing it 12 people at a time is, you know, you always want to be going faster. But because once people do the 4-day training, you come out of the 4-day training a different person than you went into it. So you want everybody to experience that.
Oh, yeah, that is a challenge, and yeah, I really do appreciate that experience that you have. I mean, it was certainly my experience that it was a frame that sort of both gave me permission and gave me sort of some boundaries around how to think about the work that I did when I went through my initial training, you know, 20 years ago.
You know, one has to be very careful to not make people feel that they were doing anything wrong all along. It's just that when you take the CQL class and you learn how to interview, you learn to think about it in a different way, so that maybe there was an assumption you made before, even though it was a well-meaning assumption. There's maybe a question that you didn't fully ask, and now we're asking it. So you really do get to know what's going on with the person more than what collectively as a team of supporters maybe we all thought or assumed. And that it's a small nuance of a difference, but it makes a huge difference in how the person feels about their life.
Right, right. Thank you, Sandra. I appreciate
Beth,
that.
this is Sadie.
Yeah.
Beth, it's Sadie. Just to tag on to that, in our agency, of course, we only have 400 employees, but at any given time we have about 50 trained interviewers. But what we've also started doing is doing some more informal training with the rest of the staff in terms of how they participate, you know, what's important to know in participating as a support person in an interview. Because what we were running up against was we had some newer staff people that didn't really understand the outcome interview or the personal outcome measures a whole lot, and they were supporting someone in an interview and didn't really know exactly what we were looking for in that interview. So we've really started a round of making sure that all of our direct support staff understand what the interview process is and what we're trying to glean from the interview so that they can best support the person.
That's a really good idea, Sadie. I like that idea.
Yeah, it's working pretty well.
Yeah. One of the other things that we have found a need to develop, and we've tried it and it's working so far, but we're like anything else, it's always we're molding and shaping. But we found a need to and a benefit from creating a training for our service coordinators and maybe how to run their meetings, their planning meetings, a little bit differently than maybe they'd done before in the light of a CQL interview happening maybe prior to the meeting, because from time to time it's not completely unusual for something to come up in a CQL interview where maybe someone expresses that it's a dream to, I'm going to make stuff up here, but like learn to drive or something, or to have an apartment of their own, and the service coordinator knowing the family and knowing that they may have significant concerns about that. How do you run the meeting then that you can embrace everybody's viewpoint, including this knowledge that you've now got directly from the person, and yet make the family members still feel included and their point of view valid, yet address clearly that the individual has stated that this is a dream that they want. So it's kind of like trying to work with service coordinators to give them greater skills to handle the meetings when sometimes things come up that might seem, at least initially, a little bit controversial or scary to some people who love that person.
Right. That's definitely a very good point and an issue that comes up often. So Can you hear me still?
Yes.
Oh,
I can hear
okay. Oh, I got this weird, a recorded voice just came on and told me my entry was not valid. I don't know what I entered. Okay, well, that's really great, and those are all really good issues. We may identify actually some things that we can, support that we can provide to organizations that are currently using, and ways that we can talk with organizations that are coming on board about some of the challenges and things to expect. So I do appreciate Sandra and Sadie and Jackie, your contributions and to the discussion, and you'll have more opportunities, but probably need to move on just a little bit. I do have a limited amount of time. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
So,
that's fine.
Okay, great. So the next thing I want to talk a little bit about is the reliability and the decision making. As I said, and how you can, what can happen with the data. We've talked about discovery and how to respond to the individual person, but then there's also kind of some organizational uses. And I mentioned we look for both we measure two things. We look for how the person defines their quality of life and is it present or not, and we look for how organizational supports are in place, and that's the quality of services. So that is, does the organization understand what the person wants, and have they then responded with supports that would bring them closer? And just as an example, here is how the data, here's 4 possible scenarios for decision-making for a particular outcome. You might have an outcome that is present and there are supports present. So say, let's use friendship, it's fairly easy to do. People have friends. The person describes who their friends are and indicates that they see them as often as they want, and they're satisfied with the amount and type of contact that they have with their friends. And when we do the follow-up with the organizational staff, they describe a clear understanding of the person's preferences with regard to friendship, and describe the supports that they're providing, whether it be transportation or locating phone numbers or those kinds of things, to make sure that the person has the outcome present the way they define it. An outcome can be present, but there would be no support present, so sort of in spite of the system. So in that case, a person might be, say, they have all their friends and they see them as often as they want, and really the organization doesn't have an understanding of what's important, and they're not really doing anything to support it, and they're not trying to learn in case their support is needed in the future. An outcome could be not present, but a support be present. So a person may have described, may be able to describe their friendships and the things that are there, but there may be something missing that's really important to them. So for instance, they may have a best friend that moved away, and they've lost their phone number and they don't know how to, or an address, and they don't know how to contact them, and they miss them. It leaves a gap in their life. If the support's present, generally the organization is aware of that situation, and they're supporting the person to try and track down that best friend to reconnect and fill that gap in their life. And then lastly, an outcome could be not present, and there would be no support present. Person in that situation may have some friends, but the person's moved away, it's left a gap in their life, but the organizational staff are not aware that that is an issue for the person, and consequently not supporting them in any way to reconnect. So that's just an example of the possible options for how you could, how a particular outcome, you could make decisions around a particular outcome. So in summary, if you look at this, you're going to have a conversation, that little blue cog in the gears up there at the top, around, and learning what's the priority outcomes for people. Then you're going to take that and design organizational supports for them, make some decisions, collect some data, the big red one in the middle. So you might have the yes and no's in terms of outcomes and supports for one person, but because you can do that with multiple people, you can begin to add those up and learn for the percentage of people that are present, that a particular outcome is present or not present. And that data then can help you identify trends both the things that you do well as an organization and the things that perhaps are important to people but not happening as often as you would like, and you can use that information in program improvement. And you can break that down by in any number of ways as long as you have the demographic data. And you can do that for, day services, for residential services, for particular type of staff member or whatever. But then you can lump it all up and have the organization-wide data and use it for quality planning at the organizational level. So it's a tool that's useful on a number of levels, but all goes back to focusing on individual programs. For very large organizations, certainly, well, for all organizations, there are some considerations in terms of the data and what you're doing with the information and how you're collecting it. For very large organizations, sampling techniques, for instance. Are you going to just focus on one program as a pilot and decide you're going to spread it out over time? Are you going to make the decision that we can't possibly do this for discovery for everybody that we support? But we want to use it for organizational improvement, so we're going to take a representative sample to get a picture of the organization. So those are some considerations in terms of sampling. Some other considerations are the reliability of the information. Have we established a system so that we know that Sadie mentioned they have 50 people that are interviewers. Is there a way that they're checking in to ensure that those 50 people are making decisions consistently so that there's not one person that interprets an outcome this way and another way? So that reliability piece. Certainly interviewer or trainer certification with CQL is one way to do that, and you can also establish internal reliability systems. And then thinking about what are you going to do with the information once you have it, because if you ask people these questions and then don't act on it, that's sort of setting them up to not have trust in you. So when you gather the information on an individual level, how are you reporting it back, as Sandra said, to ensure that people don't feel like they're doing something wrong, but here's new information, and how do we then move forward from here? And as well as organizationally, once you begin to identify trends, how do you report that information back in a meaningful way so that the organization can truly use it for quality improvement and culture change type activities. Just as, some of you have seen this data over and over, but I'm going to just show it again because I know there's some people on the call that may not have seen it. We have a database. This is through December of 2009. We've updated it, but we haven't done this particular analysis yet. It's a ranked order of all of the outcomes in our database, and which are from most to least often present. I just point out a couple of things to you that some of those things that we know we spend a lot of our time on comes as no surprise, probably safety, being free from abuse and neglect, health. Those things are generally present. You can see the HIPAA one in there. People decide when to share personal information. Those things are present. They're, 75% or so of the time for the people in our database. It's probably also no surprise to you if you look down to those bottom 5, the things present less than 50% of the time, that those are things we know we struggle with. How do we help people really meaningfully understand and exercise their rights? How about that, choosing where and with whom you live and having real options, or having employment, or doing something really that really gives you a sense of accomplishment in the day, for the daytime. Being truly integrated and having meaningful contributions to your society, to your community. We know those things are things that we really struggle with. So this is probably not too surprising, but it may validate certainly your experience in the system. The thing that I think is slightly more interesting is this second set of data. It's the second slide that takes that in data, and we've done a predictive analysis. What are the outcomes that when they are present, a lot of other outcomes are likely to be present for people. And interestingly, the ones that have the most predictive capability, most predictive are those things that we struggle the most with, right? Choosing live and where and work, social roles. And the things that are least likely to predict lots of other outcomes are the things that are present most of the time already: health, free from abuse and neglect, safety. And I guess what this says is that we have said all along that those basic foundational elements are essential. We have to do them. There are, responsibility. They're non-negotiables for people. But in and of themselves, they are insufficient to true quality of life. So you can be safe and healthy, but have a lot of other really meaningful things missing in your life. And so we have to also focus on those other things. Those other things, actually, when they're present, are likely to predict some of those other things, some of the foundational elements as well. So I think that's just an interesting way of presenting the data, and helps us maybe set some of our priorities. In terms of the outcome measures and what might be next, many of the organizations that we're working with in New York have elected to really do this capacity building piece. And part of that has to do with OPWDD's requirements that when as the DISCOs begin to collect the data, that it be collected by certified interviewers. So just want to talk with you a little bit about some of the options that we have available regarding training with personal outcome measures. The first is a very basic overview, but it's pretty accessible and affordable and a good way to get your toes wet if you're just interested in looking to see if it's a good values match. And that's some e-learning courses available through a partnership with Essential Learning. Sandra mentioned the 4-day workshop. This is sort of the foundation of all of our certification programs, and it's a 4-day experiential training for 12 people at a time, in which they actually go out and do interviews with people supported and do the follow-up and come back, and CQL facilitate decision-making so that they can begin to really see how you gather the information, how you apply that information in terms of understanding presence or absence of outcomes. We do have, and we haven't done many of these workshops in New York, but just so you know it's available, we do have a workshop that takes sort of a modification of the assessment and decision-making one, that rather than focusing so much on presence or absence, it does tend to zero in on what is the person's focus and how would you develop a plan out of that information that you've learned in an interview. I mentioned that the assessment workshop is the foundational training for both our interviewer and trainer certification. We do have certification programs for people that have been through the 4-day assessment workshop. If they want to get a little bit of additional coaching and then do reliability with CQL staff, they can be considered a certified interviewer, meaning that they basically, if they make decisions consistent with ours, 87% of the time or greater, then they are considered a certified interviewer. And what that means is they go out, they do an interview with CQL staff observing, and we make decisions separately and compare for agreement. So there's 21 outcomes, so you have 42 decision points, both outcome and support, which means you can disagree with CQL on 6 of those and still be considered a certified interviewer. The trainer certification is really sort of building in-house capacity to do that assessment workshop on your own without having to bring CQL in every time. And so, again, the foundation for people who've been through the 4-day workshop, they would come back and observe the workshop then they would have another sort of time where they get some coaching and do their reliability as well. And then the final phase of that workshop, they would deliver the workshop with CQL observing and providing feedback for certification. Generally, we do that trainer certification with 2 people at a time, so they're, co-training, and, we provide feedback about whether that's the strengths of their skills, both in the interview process and in the training process. So those are options for capacity building related to the personal outcome measures. I'm not sure where we are with time. Let me look. I think we've got about 40 minutes before we were scheduled, I believe, to end. So if this was just another opportunity for people who have experience with the data and or the training and certification, if they wanted to talk with their peers, or if they had questions, or we can a little bit of time for discussion.
Beth, it's Sadie. I just wanted to let the group know that, ways that the agency can support the education of its staff. What we did early on, after we had our first accreditation review, and we found out that our numbers weren't exactly where we thought they should be, we decided that we would. It's not about what you're doing wrong. What we tell staff is this is an opportunity to start doing something better than we had been doing, and to pick something and start doing it, start fixing it. So, initially back in 2000 or 2001 when we had our first review, we barely made the accreditation with our numbers, and we were surprised at how low some of the numbers were. So we set up some work groups that were comprised of, cross-sections of people within the agency, people we provided services to, family members, direct care staff, management, and executive staff. And we focused on different areas like community focus, self-direction, personal well-being, person-centered planning, and had those people get together and come up with training for all staff in how to improve the quality of people's lives in those areas. Those work groups are still active all these years later. So we're using that to help staff create better ways of doing things.
Thank you, Faith.
I had a question related to certification on an individual chapter basis versus I've heard that there's like a group type of certification that is possible.
You might be talking about accreditation, Eric.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think Eric, I get an echo. You're not muted. Sorry. So individual organizations can be accredited, such as Adirondack ARC and some of the others that are on the line and that have gone through that process. We are working with 5 ARC chapters that have come together in the Mid-Hudson Valley to do a single accreditation for them. And we've done that on the basis of a couple of things. One is they have built common systems around basic assurances. They're sharing policy, the same policy and procedure. There are some other things that they've done as a collaborative that sort of give them almost a single organization entity status, although they have different, they all have their own boards of directors and governance and that kind of thing. So what they've done as a network around the DSP training and credentialing work that they're doing. there's a couple of ways that they've already collaborated and built common systems. So we can assess those things as they are. We are in that network process also, though, going to visit each of the organizations and help them develop an agency-specific plan. Will then feed into a network plan. So their accreditation is a network accreditation, but they will have organization-specific feedback and recommendations as well. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak to the use of data at the organizational level or any of their experience with certification, individual certification and training with the personal outcome measures? I think next I'm going to talk specifically about accreditation.
Beth, it's Sadie again.
Great.
In terms of use of the data, I'm echoing, aren't I? Okay, in terms of use of the data, we incorporate our personal outcome data into our strategic plan. And quarterly, we present to our board of directors and to family members with the staff members the data over time. So we have like a 5-year and 8-year running set of data, and we look at the agency as a whole, and all the interviews that were conducted over time. It was split in between people living in certified sites with us and people living at home or on their own. So we use that as part of our strategic planning in terms of looking at the data that gives us an idea of whether in a given quarter we're losing ground or gaining ground. So that's one of the ways that we look at the data incorporated into our strategic planning.
Thank you, Sadie. I think we've got another echo now. I'm not sure why that's happening, but I think it happens when people who are using the VoIP haven't muted. Gone away. That's great. Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit now about accreditation and the process for accreditation. I've mentioned the basic assurances. We've talked at length about the personal outcome measures, and then there's a third set of metrics that are the person-centered excellence factors and indicators, and those are sort of the core of what we ultimately call the person-centered excellence accreditation plan. I'll talk a little bit about each of those sets of measures, each of those other sets of measures now. We won't rehash the personal outcome. Basic assurances are really the systems and practice, the organizational systems and practice around foundational elements of health, safety, and human security. There are 10 topic areas that are things like prevention of abuse and neglect, safety, health. As I said, they correspond very closely to those first outcomes of myself. There are also factors around families and or connecting to natural supports and staff resources and support, so your HR systems, hiring, training, all of that kind of stuff, and continuity and security in your business practices. The final factor of these, as I said, there's 10 factor areas with different topics, but the final one you'll hear people talk about that have been engaged with this, factor 10. Factor 10 is the integrated quality management system. This is how you take a treetop sort of view of all of the data and information and quality assurance activities that you're engaged in, including personal outcome measures data, so that you're not sort of doing quality improvement in silos, that you don't have a safety committee that just looks at safety and doesn't understand that safety is also connected to rights, is also connected to health, is also connected to staff training and support, and your incident management system is more comprehensive and integrated with all of the data that you as an organization collect. We've seen lots of different ways that Factor 10 is implemented, from very, sort of simple but elegant systems to some that are quite complex that can get you some really great information. But we don't, we encourage you to keep it usable and understandable. We don't want to, we're not looking for systems that, most of the organization can't understand. Those basic assurances are really critical. But when I think about these, we talk about the system, the thing that sustains it over time, your policy, your practice, your training protocol, whatever, policy, procedure, training protocol. But then the other piece of that is the practice. How is it, how are you ensuring that the system that you've put in place is implemented as it's been intended, when you intended it to be implemented? And then the third piece of that puzzle is, you think about a strong system plus an effective practice. What does that equal? Well, it should equal results in people's lives, and your personal outcome measures data will help you measure the effectiveness of your basic assurance. The next set of measures are the person-centered excellence factors and indicators. And if you think back to the data that I showed you, our national data around the outcomes and their rank and their predictiveness, one of the things that prompted us to develop these sets of measures really was the fact that we saw that despite 20 years of talking about person-centeredness, we're still struggling with some of those things that are sort of core to quality of life. And it's as a system we're struggling. We see isolated examples. All of us in our organization will see examples of where it's really working. And we also know that there are some organizations that, more systematically are able to accomplish some really innovative and person-centered services for a lot of people. And so we know it's possible. We just haven't figured out how to bring it to scale. And so we worked with HSRI, Human Services Research Institute, and did a number of other sort of national and international experts, including people supported and clinicians and administrators and theorists around what makes, what are the things that organizations do, not just what they believe, not just their values, but what are the things that organizations that are truly person-centered do that make them that way, that bring, that bring positive results in people's lives. And so this material was introduced in 2011 after about 2 years of, doing that research and putting it together. And there are 8 topic areas and 34 indicators here. The other thing that we did with these measures is we built it we built a process around it that's built on organizational development principles and the theory of appreciative inquiry. So, starting from a premise that all organizations do some things well, they have some really strong capacities, and to try and organizationally build on those strengths. And this is really, it's common sense. As a field, we have really shifted our planning with people from, sort of deficit-based planning to planning around people's gifts and strengths and abilities. We thought, those principles apply as much to organizations and organizational culture as they do to people. And so we have used this material and built around it a process that really does try to build on that as well. So I thought I'd just walk you through the accreditation process a little bit. So it starts with a sort of a decision that you want to be accredited. You can use the personal outcome measures tool and build internal capacity with, as much as you want without ever going for accreditation. Outcomes are part of accreditation, however, so that if you do want to go for accreditation, we expect that you sort of have a commitment to looking at outcomes. But once you decide you want to be accredited, you would submit a request to engage. It's basically an application, but it gives us a little bit more information about your organization, sort of your vision and mission, what you do know about outcomes, where you are, what kinds of services that you provide, the geographic area that you cover, a little bit of demographics about number of people that you support, gender, that kind of thing. We suggest that organizations looking at accreditation submit this 6 months to a year prior to when they would like us to come on site for the accreditation visit. And the reason is because during, once you've made that decision and submitted that form, you're going to engage in a process of self-assessment around those basic assurances. And, we ask you to talk to assess the presence of systems, presence of practice, and develop it's basically a gap analysis. What are you doing? What are you not doing? Where are there some conflicting kinds of things? And then do some action planning around, what you're going to do to address some of the areas that you might not have fully in place. That process is as good as you make it. In some places where we do a lot of accreditation, mandated states and stuff, we get these forms and clearly, the QA person sat in her office with the door shut and put checks based on her opinion and really didn't do much, didn't engage the rest of the organization in much detail. The organizations where we see who have done really effective basic assurances, self-assessments, have gathered together groups of people similar to what Sadie described they did back before we even introduced the basic assurances around other things, but groups of people that really represent multiple viewpoints within the organization, have a vested interest in what comes out of the process, and who have really, sort of are champions in their, sphere of influence within the organization so that you can get some things done. You don't have to have all your action steps completed and accomplished before your on-site visit. It's really mostly about an awareness. Now, if you uncover something in that self-assessment that's, pretty significant and concerning issue, a big gap in an area that puts people systemically at risk, we're going to expect that you resolve that with, haste and rather immediately. But otherwise, it's really a process of quality improvement and strengthening and building on those systems and integrating your quality management processes and quality improvement processes. So that's part of what you'll be doing in that time frame from the time that you request to engage in the on-site visit. As we move a little closer to the visit, there are a series of 2 conferences, teleconference calls with CQL in preparation for the on-site visit, particularly related. We may discuss the basic assurances on some level, but also related to the agenda for the person-centered excellence portion of the accreditation visit and how you're going to be preparing for that. There's a logistics call really with kind of the leadership of the organization, who should participate, at what level, and then there's another call that we can focus a little bit, that maybe include more people, but focus a little bit more on content and sort of get people geared up for what's going to happen. We'll also talk, based on your self-assessment in that second call, about what are the validation protocols that we're going to look at on site related to basic assurances. You may have some things that you do really well that you want to show us, some things that you think are innovative and you're very proud of, and there also may be some areas that we see or that you identify as gaps that you'd like us to look at it so that we can together talk about what possible recommendations might be. So the on-site visit is 5 days, and the first couple of days really focus on the assurances and, based on our agreement from the conversation that we had after your self-assessment. And the end of the visit, the last couple of days of the visit are really focused on the person-centered excellence indicators and this stakeholder engagement. So you'll have a group of anywhere from 25 to 50 people representing people supported, families, direct support professionals, administration and management of the organization, MSCs if as well, perhaps funders if you can get them there, governing bodies. Anyway, a stakeholder group, and we talk a lot about that in that preparation, gathers together and looks at those factors and indicators related to person-centered excellence, does some prioritization, and ultimately agrees on 3 priorities for your accreditation plan. Once that plan is, the group as a whole makes recommendations to leadership, and the leadership develops a draft plan on site that they present back to the group, and that becomes your accreditation, the frame of your accreditation. Assuming that there are no substantive issues related to basic assurances, nothing that we're, either of us are really concerned about, you have a commitment to utilize building the personal outcome measures into your quality improvement, your quality system, and you develop this plan and you're willing to move forward with it, you are accredited at the end of that on-site visit, and it's a 4-year term of accreditation. Throughout the term, there are a couple of checkpoints, and we'll provide feedback and information to you at 9 months and at 18 months. The 18 months is really more formal than the 9 months is kind of just everything okay. It's a temperature check. Want to make sure that you are moving forward and you didn't get stuck. But the 18-month check is a little more formal. These are both off-site generally. And so when I say a little more formal, I mean that we're going to ask you to submit some data and a progress report on where you are with your plan, any changes that you need to make, and we're going to follow up in a teleconference with you regarding the information that you've submitted. Also, if we had made any recommendations related to the basic assurances, we're going to ask that you submit that information as well. If you request or we have concerns at that 18-month follow-up, we may require an on-site visit just to jumpstart the process. But so far, with very few exceptions, it's all been off-site follow-up at that point. So that's kind of, and then at the end of the 4-year cycle, you resubmit the request to engage. So as I said, just to reiterate, the criteria for accreditation is that your basic assurances are substantially in place, that there are no red flags related to abuse, neglect, safety, or health, that you are agreeing to implement your PCE accreditation plan, and that you are planning for ongoing use of the personal outcome measures in your quality system. Just want to quickly talk about our understanding of the personal outcome measures and how OPWDD intends to use them in your system. It's going to be one of the measures that they require DISCOs to collect. And as I understand it, the sample for each of the DISCOs will be selected by OPWDD, that they're requiring that data be collected by certified interviewers and or trainers, because they've both done reliability with CQL. However, what they're not saying DISCOs have to employ those interviewers or trainers. So organizations that are members in that network that have that those certified people on staff those people can collect the data. The details in terms of when the data is collected, when you'll get your sample, when you have to have the results turned into OPWDD are left. I don't think they've been ironed out completely yet. But the only other thing I know that they've required is that the DISCOs will use that they're going to look to see that the DISCOs have taken that data that they've collected, analyzed it, and integrated it into their own quality improvement strategy. So that's we've got about 15 minutes left. I think, in our time. And so I thought I'd open it up to any questions or comments or thoughts one final time. Anybody have anything? Well, here is my email address if you want to individually contact me. I know that you probably, we'll continue to be in touch with NYSARC as you all go through your own sort of process for becoming a DISCO in the state. And my cell number, I'll give you that over the phone for anybody that would like to just have that in their contact information, is 410-499-6044. And my cell is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. I do travel, and leave me a voicemail, let me know when's a good time to call you back, or I might respond and let you know what my availability is so we can connect at a later time. Looks like there is a question in the chat. Is the PowerPoint frozen? Well, I can tell you what is showing on my screen, and that is a blue screen that has our mission, website, my name, my email, and a CQL logo on it. If that's not what you're seeing, your computer may be frozen. Anybody else having a problem with it? Eric, do you have any other questions, or is there anything that you need for me to cover that I didn't cover today? Is anybody there? I'm beginning to wonder. Did I lose people?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to let the participants know that this has been recorded, and I will be sending out a link to the recording for those who were unable to join or had trouble logging in or anything of that nature. And that'll be in the next couple of days. We'll be sending that out.
All right. Thanks. Anything else you want to?
No, if there are no questions, thank you, Beth, very much. It was a good overview. I hope the chapters got some information that they can use and pull back and hopefully implement some of these processes.